Hi and welcome. My name's Rob. I'm the program director. This is Tori, my program assistant. The two of us wanted to come together today and tell you a little bit about camp and prep you for some of the things as we get ready for the summertime. So we have things like a packing list and whatnot that we're going to send out to you by way of email, and it's also linked in the description below. But we want to kind of go over some specific things to highlight that, as well as some of our policies and a lot of the other frequently asked questions. This will be a bit of a long video, so if you need to use the timestamps, that'll be down below as well by subject, so you can skip ahead if you had specific questions. But that being said, we're going to jump right in there and start with packing. So when it comes to packing, we'll send you a list and it'll give you all the different things that you want to bring. But on that, I'm going to give you some tips. First of all, less is more. You're going to be in a camp cabin. There's not going to be a ton of space. So if you bring in tons of stuff, you're not going to have a lot of room for it. So you really want to stick to like a suitcase, your sleeping bag, your pillow, and try to avoid bringing too much more than that, because pretty much everything you have, you want to either be able to slide under the bunk or at the end, so that way it isn't like migrating all over the cabin and whatnot. But let's jump into some of the specific things that are on that list and some of the tips and kind of advice we can give you with that. So one of the most important things, obviously, with packing is going to be your clothing. You want to make sure you have good functional clothes that are going to hold up to playing outside, riding on horseback, playing in the woods, that protect you from the sunlight, things like that. So these are all very important things. But there are some types of clothes that maybe you really don't want to pack, that are not really that functional. So Tori, why don't you tell us some of the clothes that are not really ones that we would want to pack here at camp?
Okay, some of the clothes are to not wear: tight clothes, crop tops, spaghetti straps, and short shorts.
Yeah, then the glare. But anyway, so with that though, it's not just of modesty, although that's a big part of it. We want to make sure that we look modest, but it's also because those kinds of clothes don't really hold up that well to horseback riding or getting sunburned or whatever. You want to be wearing clothes that are more for play than for looks. Some other things too is make sure that you've got enough clothes for the week. So some good things to add in there. You want to make sure you have a good jacket, by the way, because that'll keep you warm at night. But a big one that gets missed a lot is pants, which you wouldn't think so, but it really does happen quite a bit. We actually have a stock of pants, but if you want ones that fit well and whatnot, you want to bring your own. But anyhow, you want to make sure you have enough pairs of pants for the week for riding. So, I mean, if you're the type where you want to wear jeans twice, that's fine. Then have like 3 pairs of jeans. If you want a different one for each day, that's cool too. But with jeans, make sure you grab the type that are more comfortable and functional, not like tight-fitting fashion jeans, because they don't tend to work as well on a horse and they tend to be uncomfortable, whereas like a nice loose-fitting pair of like cowboy jeans or just jeans, that'll work. So make sure you have enough there. If you're an English rider, you might have some English riding pants, but the thing is that you need to have pants in order to get on a horse. You can't ride the horse with shorts on, because that'll tend to tear up your legs, not to mention it'll be kind of really, yeah, you don't want to do that. Just trust me. So that's really important there. Another thing that's really important that sometimes people forget to pack is shoes. Now, you don't need a million shoes, okay? But it is a good idea to have some sort of tennis shoes or hiking shoes, you know, something that you can run around and play in. We usually tell people, sometimes people like to bring flip-flops, but the thing is about flip-flops is that they're not really, because we're on a farm, we don't usually wear those unless we're in the shower or at the swimming. What I would say is a good idea is get either Crocs or like an off-brand version, because they can also function as shoes because they're closed-toed. So that's kind of helpful as well. So if you need to like dry out a pair of shoes, you've got something else to wear that's not flip-flops. People tend to hurt their toes and whatnot with sandals and flip-flops. And then last but not least in the shoes is making sure we've got good riding boots. So what makes a good riding boot is this. First of all, it's got to be closed-toed. Second of all, usually you want to have a heel on it. And then you also want toes that are narrow enough that they can slide in and out of stirrups. Like I'm wearing boots right now that are like work boot cowboy boots, but they have really wide toes. They don't work as well for riding. But something like this, where this is kind of like a standard work boot size or the narrower cowboy boot style, these slide in and out of stirrups really easy. You want that for riding. Quick tip with those boots though, make sure you break them in before camp. Sometimes we have kids go out and they buy cowboy boots, either at Goodwill or brand new or whatever, and then they wear them for the first time at camp, and sometimes kids don't realize you probably shouldn't run around all day in your cowboy boots and you get blisters and stuff like that. So break them in before you bring them to camp and just tell your kids, hey, make sure you wear these for riding, wear your tennis shoes for other things, and that'll make things go better. Another area, kind of speaking of the flip-flops and Crocs thing, is that we have time that we get to spend down by the lake doing things like swimming and enjoying water sports and stuff like that. However, obviously you're going to want to pack a swimsuit. So there are still some guidelines. We want to make sure that people are wearing good clothing for that as well. So Tori, you want to talk a little bit about swimsuits?
Yeah, well, modest is best policy. Either a one piece for the ladies, covering up, and then or modest two-piece.
Yep, so we can wear something like that as well. So another important thing, obviously, is bedding. You want to make sure that you're bringing a pillow. Don't forget your pillow. That gets forgotten quite a bit. A sleeping bag or blankets. I would advise sleeping bag personally, but you can bring blankets if you'd like. Some people like to have a fitted sheet for the bunk. If you decide to go that route, then it's a twin-size bunk typically, so that'll fit. A fitted sheet will fit those. Some advice I give you with that is I would stick your pillow and your sleeping bag in some black trash bags. The reason I do that is if the weather is bad when you're coming into camp, that'll help keep them dry and they don't run into that issue. And if you bring two of them to start with, this is what I would say, is that if you bring two of them to start with, one of those bags can be used for holding dirty clothes throughout the week. And then at the end of the week, stick both the sleeping bag and the pillow in the empty bag together. So now you got a dirty clothes bag and you've got a bag with your pillows and whatnot in it. Just be careful that your student brings those back, because the problem with the black trash bag is it's a black trash bag and it could potentially get thrown out if you aren't careful. So good idea to make sure that you say, hey, make sure these come back. Which brings me to the next thing when we're talking about towels and toiletry type stuff. So with towels, one of the tips I've learned, I have 4 kids myself, and one of the things I've learned is that I don't send my children to camp with the nice towels. I send them to camp with the ones that I really couldn't care less if they come back or not, because half the time I'm like, ooh. But anyhow, still, if you do want those towels to come back, a quick tip is stick your child's name on the tag on the towel or something like that. If we have a name, we can get it back to the student pretty easily. If we don't have a name, well, we have tons of white and blue towels in our lost and found because they look like everybody's towels. But make sure you have enough for the week. Usually a beach towel is good, as well as a showering towel. And then if you use a washcloth or a loofah or whatnot, make sure you bring that. So that's some things there. Some other toiletries to bring. Make sure you bring some soap, shampoo, toothbrush, and toothpaste. We have that get forgotten a lot. So make sure you've got those. Double check with your kids that they put them in there. And then, of course, deodorants. We don't want them smelling funny. But kind of in that vein, have a container to put them in, whether that's like one of those little toiletries bags or something else. And I would really advise doing the little travel size shampoo and body wash stuff. Like bar soap tends to get kind of gross at camp, whereas those little travel things, it's like $2 at Walmart. Those work out a lot better because they don't make as much of a mess. But if you do bring bar soap, I would make sure you have a container to set that in it as well, so that way it doesn't get all over everything, as it often will. There's some other things that you'll want to bring as well, and I'm going to turn over to Tori to talk about the next thing.
For those who need it, don't forget about the feminine care products, because we'll need those within the weeks of camp. And if you haven't talked to your daughter about it, maybe it's the time to do so if they're hitting that age. Just taking that as a parent, that step, and talking to them about it and talking to them how they use it before they get to camp, which should be very helpful.
Alrighty, and then some other accessories as well. There's some other things we should bring too. What are some other ones, Tori?
Water bottles, definitely need that. Something that's not too fancy, because we have kids that miss their water bottles and then it's this big thing, they can't find it. Sunscreen, we're definitely going to need that for the kids that burn pretty easily in the sun. We're out there a lot. Rain or shine. And then bug spray, because we're in the woods, we're on a farm, you're going to need that too.
And then, another one you might want as well would be like a disposable camera. Now, we do tell the kids they're not allowed to be taking pictures in the cabins or in bathrooms or areas where people might be changing, but you can bring a disposable camera. I would really strongly advise against like one of the nicer, like a digital camera or something, because again, it's camp, things can get broken. We also don't let people bring their phones to use as cameras. We'll talk a little bit about prohibited items here in just a minute. But one thing I would say with your disposable camera is make sure you stick your name on it in a place that's not going to get lost. So that way, if it does get lost, we're going to be like, oh, this belongs to so-and-so, and we can hand it back to them. Because the downside of disposable cameras, there's like 2 types, so they all look exactly the same. Also, if you stick the name on the little cardboard thing, like which is what most people do, where it's got like the little green wrap around it and they'll put their name on it, tell your kid don't take that off, because sometimes kids are like, woohoo, and then it's just a black camera and nobody knows who it belongs to. So make sure they leave that name on there. So now that we've talked a little bit about cameras, which is an electronic we can have, let's talk a little bit about some of the things we're not allowed to bring to camp, both for safety and for other reasons as well. So let's start out with this, prohibited items. So things like drugs, alcohol, vapes, tobacco, any of those kinds of substances are a no-go. That's kind of an obvious one, but we'll still toss that out there just to make sure we say that. Now, something that's a little less obvious is like prescription drugs and stuff like that. We're going to talk about what we do with those later, but let me tell you what we don't do with them. They don't go into cabins. That includes even things like Advil, ibuprofen, anything like that. Even vitamins should not be in the cabins. That's in a lot of areas that's state law, and that's a general regulation. You don't have those in a cabin with kids because you don't know who's going to get into them. So that needs to go to the nurse if you have those things. It should not be in your bag. It should not go to your cabin. Now, next thing would be electronics. So we're going to be busy at camp. We're going to be doing a lot of stuff outside. We don't want to have distractions, things like video games or stuff like that. So electronics are a no-go. The only exception, again, would be if you have a camera. And again, you can do most people do the disposable. If you have a cheap or an old digital camera, those are allowed, but no other electronics are allowed. We don't want them getting broken, lost, or somebody taking them. Along that same vein, phones are also not allowed. We don't allow kids to have phones, and there's a lot of very good practical reasons for this, as well as security reasons as well. We don't want to have kids able to send things out or post things on social media or call people outside of camp. Stuff like that are all things that shouldn't be happening on a phone. That we just don't want to get them lost or anything. Some of those phones are expensive. You don't want to have your iPhone 16 at the bottom of the lake. All of these are bad things. So no phones at camp. Now there are some exceptions. Okay, like for instance, a physical medical need. Like there are some times where a phone needs to be held on a person because it's connected to like a blood sugar monitor or something like that. That would be an example of a narrow exception that we can allow for only that reason. Another instance where maybe bringing a phone to camp but you can't have it on you would be like, say, one parent dropped a child off and a different parent was picking them up, or maybe there's an older camper and they drove to camp, something like that. You would turn that phone in at the beginning of the week and then we give it back to you at the end of the week. Those are some examples of exceptions, but as a general rule, phones are a no-go. Next one, lighters or matches or anything you can light a fire with. Obviously, we don't want that just sitting around in a cabin because that can end poorly. Another obvious one will be like pornography or explicit materials, and that includes stuff that's like on shirts or clothing as well. Just kind of use some discretion with that. Is this something that's appropriate for camp? And then the next one on this list is money. We have our camp store, and you put money on the camp store. In fact, you did that when you registered. If you want to stick a little bit extra, you can when you get here to register, but don't send your child with cash. Because cash, there's no way to track it. If it goes missing, it's gone. We might get lucky and we might find it, but chances are we're not. So I don't bring cash with you to camp. It just ends poorly most of the time. And then last but not least is any kind of weapon. So obviously guns, that's a no-go. Knives, machetes, all sorts of stuff like that. Those are obvious, don't bring those to camp. Now, one thing that isn't quite so obvious is Frontier Pathfinders. We have a camp that is a survival-based camp, and there is an exception for knives on that, but we'll talk about that later. Now let's real quick talk about medication. So there's a form that you get in camp that kind of explains this a little bit, but I'm going to go over it here in the video as well. So this is what we do with your medication. First and foremost, everything that you are sending your child to camp with has to be listed on your medical form. Don't send something that's not listed on there, because then we're going to be like, well, what do we do with this? So when you fill out that form, make sure that everything you list is there, and that you don't have extras, or on the flip side of the coin, you don't send it at all. You don't want to take your child off their meds for a week just to see what happens because it's more convenient. That's going to end poorly, which is kind of a duh. But anyhow, moving on. So what we do with this is that we turn that into the nurse at registration. But this is how I'm going to have you guys pack it. First of all, go to the store and you can pick up some large Ziploc bags and some small Ziploc bags. Now in this case, this is a nice small pill bag. You can get these at the store. If you can't find these though, even little Ziplocs like the sandwich size ones will work too. just as long as they're sealable so they can't fall out. And what you want to do is you'll take your child's medication, and so we give doses at breakfast, lunch, dinner, and bedtime. So what you want to do is, like, say your child takes a bedtime med or vitamins or something like that. What you want to do is get one of these baggies, one baggie for each dose. So if you're giving a dose at breakfast, you would need 5 little baggies. And on each one, you'd stick the dose that's in there, whatever it is they're supposed to take, write their name on it, say so you'd have a Monday breakfast, Tuesday breakfast, Wednesday breakfast, and so on. You write that there, and then below that you have what's in the baggie, or what's supposed to be in the baggie, okay? So in this case we've got 2 pills. It lists out what those 2 pills are, seal it, and you do that for all the doses for the week. And then you'd stick that into the big baggie. Now in the big baggie, what you're going to have is you're going to have the original prescription bottle with the prescription label. This one doesn't actually have it on it, but just use your imagination. With prescriptions, we need to have that original prescription label from the doctor. So that way if our nurse has a question, she's got all that pertinent information. It's important for them to be able to have that in case it's needed. With that as well, make sure it's in date. That's very important as well, because we have a nurse on every single week. They cannot legally give a child something that's out of date, even if it's their prescription medication. So always check that. Make sure the date's right on there. So basically, you've already dosed these out yourself in the little baggies, but this is so we have a couple of extra in case for some reason you needed those, and as well we have the actual prescription bottle. So you'll set that in there. So you'll put all of those in there. Some other ones you want to stick in there here as the PRNs or the as needed, so it's like an EpiPen and like an inhaler. Again, EpiPens and inhalers, these ones are notorious for that. Check to make sure they're in date. We have that happen a lot, where somebody's like, oh, I've had that for a year, I didn't think to look at the date, and it's out of date. So what you'll do is you'll set all of the doses for the week in here. You'll set the original prescription bottles in there, the as-needed medications if you have them, and then write the name, write what's in there, so that way we know what's contained within there. So list everything that's in there, and then write how many doses you have. Like, hey, I've got 5 breakfast doses and 5 bedtime doses, whatever. So that way we've got that sorted out. There will also be a document online as well that explains that in case you need that in a little bit more detail. But that's what we'll do with the medication. Now, we actually you'll take that whole bag, and when you go through the registration line, you'll turn that into the nurse. That's also an opportunity to talk with the nurse if you have some any special considerations for your child, like, hey, I just want to make sure this is taken care of or whatever. You can talk with her then, and then she'll also go over and make sure that you have everything there. Before you turn all that in though, double check to make sure it's all correct and that everything in that bag matches what's on your medical form. So make sure you double check that, so that way we don't wind up with a discrepancy between the two. So that's how that rolls. Next thing with that as well is we do carry over-the-counter medications. So we carry common medications like children's aspirin, or ibuprofen, or children's Tylenol, things like that. We carry those so you don't feel the need that you gotta have like all the different potential medications in there. This is just for stuff that's regularly scheduled that's in there. One note on that though, if you're using an over-the-counter medication like Tylenol and your child is under the age of what's considered an adult, like 12 or whatnot, make sure that you have a doctor's note if they told them, hey, take an adult dose of whatever, because again, the nurse is going to follow what her requirements are, and that is that she doses according to the age. So that's something to bear in mind. If it's an adult med and you have a child under 12 and the doctor said, yeah, let's take an adult dose, get a note from the doctor, have that written in there as well. So that way we know they're allowed to do that, otherwise we can't dose them that way. Anyway, so that's how that goes. And then last consideration on the medications is this. There are things like vitamins and stuff like that. We already talked about that. And if you want your child to have vitamins at breakfast and whatnot, that's why we have you putting your own doses in those little baggies. We do that so that way you get to make sure you put in there what you want them to take. That being said, there are some things that maybe aren't necessarily that important. Like for instance, the Flintstones vitamins, you could probably go a week without those, and that's one less thing for you to pack. So it's one thing to consider. It's up to you, but you have the option either way. So we're going to take a minute to talk a little bit about communication. So there is several different ways that we can communicate at camp. One of them is email. We also have snail mail, and then we also have packages as well. One thing we don't do, mainly for the sake of homesickness, is we don't do calls in and out of camp. The reason we do this is A, it kind of complicates things a little bit. B, it tends to make homesickness worse. It doesn't tend to help. A lot of people think, oh, if I talk to my child every day that they won't be homesick. On the contrary, it tends to do the opposite because it keeps their mind on home, whereas the best cure for homesickness is keep your mind on what you're doing. So that's what we try to do, is keep that out of there as well. So those are some reasons why we don't do the calls in and out. Oh, and last but not least, if a kid is calling in and out, even if they're not getting homesick, some of the other kids in the cabin sometimes will, because they see one kid can call and one kid can't. So anyhow, we don't do calls in and out. But let's talk a little bit about email. So that's the easiest way to communicate with your camper. And we actually have a link on our website. That's the Email a Camper. And as long as you send it to us by 4 o'clock of the day you want it sent in, we can make sure it gets printed out and it gets turned into their counselor, who then gives it to them. Now, in order to help out with that, what we need you to do is on the email in the subject line, you should be able to have the camper name, the week, as well as their cabin name. Those are important things for a couple reasons. One, because it gets to your camper. If you put the wrong cabin name in, it'll get bunched in with the wrong cabin, and if the camper's not in there, then we have to figure out how to get it to them, so there's always a chance it won't. So make sure you stick the correct cabin name in. The other thing is that helps us with screening as well. I hate to say it, but these days we have to think about things like cyberbullying and stuff like that. And one of the forms that has taken in the past is people sending emails to bully somebody, or just to be kind of just mean. They think they're being funny, but they're being mean. So there's a couple things you can do to help with that. First and foremost, don't broadcast to anybody aside from the people who need to know that your child is at camp. That's a good general security anyway. Don't tell people that aren't your family, hey, my child is at a camp somewhere. Tell your child as well. It's okay to be like, hey, I'm going to camp. That's cool. But don't be like, hey, I'm going to camp on this week, and this is my cabin, and this is what I'm doing. Because if they are struggling with bullying at school, they're kind of giving them the information they need to know to be able to figure that out and do stuff like Email a Camper. Another thing you can do as well to kind of help with that is have a designated person that is sending emails. So that way, if your child gets an email from someone that says, oh, it's Aunt Debbie, and they're like, what? They're going to be able to know that, okay, that's not my mom, that's somebody else. Now, I will say we do try to screen the emails as much as we can. So that way, if we see something suspicious, or if it's something that doesn't appear to be coming from the parents, we'll set it off to the side and confirm that, or figure out what it is before it goes to a child. The thing is, though, is that we don't have the time to read through every single email, not to mention that would be a privacy issue because you don't want us reading their mail. So with that in mind, have one person that's a designated person and make sure that you don't give that information out to anybody but the people who are supposed to know. And that will do a lot to curtail that issue. So anyhow, with that, another way that you can contact your child is through snail mail. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it to Tori here so she can tell you a little bit about that.
Okay, for snail mail, you're going to take the envelope, you're going to put your child's name, the week, and then remember the cabin, which will be told when you drop your kid off. Put the address, and make sure you send it out in advance so that it's not coming after they're done with the week of camp. Also, if you want your child to send you mail, give them the address and the envelope with the stamp on it so that they can send it.
Alrighty. And just remember, send it in advance, like the week before is pretty good. If you don't know the cabin name, then put every information you know, and we'll make sure that gets to them. Now let's talk a little bit about packages. We do allow a package a week to a kid. However, we don't allow giant packages. Some of this is because trying to transfer all those during mail time is really tricky. So what we tell people to do is make sure that what you send can fit into one of these envelopes here. So you set the address on that and send it in there, or you can drop it off with us when you register, whatever the case might be. But with that, make sure that it fits in the envelope. If you stick snacks or food in here, please make sure that it's individually wrapped, that it's not something like Skittles or something like that, that you can't like wrap it up again. But like individual wrap, things like fun size or whatnot, because we do have issues with things that we're out in the woods. There's things like raccoons and animals and ants and stuff. So we don't want to have stuff that they either can't get eaten in one sitting or that it can't be like individually packaged. So do that, bear that in mind as well. So that's what we've got there for packages. So we're going to talk a little bit now about some of our specialty camps. Now we talked about our horse specialty camps in the horse section, but there are two different specialty camps that are non-horse related. One of them is Critter Camp. That's kind of like an outdoor education camp for little kids. The other one is Frontier Pathfinders. Now, as I mentioned in the prohibited items, is that there is one exception for knives, and that is only for Frontier Pathfinders. So if you are not in a Frontier Pathfinders camp, you're not allowed to have a knife. So just to make that abundantly clear. But for Frontier Pathfinders, you are allowed to bring your own knife with you. Now bear in mind, we actually do have loaner knives, so you don't have to do that because we can supply those. But if you'd like to learn using your own knife, you may do so. And how that's gonna work during the week is that when you arrive for registration, if you have a knife on you, when you go to your cabin, your Frontier Pathfinders counselor, what you'll do is you'll turn that knife into them. And then they will put it in a box and they will let you use it during the times that we have classes for Frontier Pathfinders. That's the only time you're allowed to use it. When you're done with the classes for the day, and that's in the morning during the horse program, you'll be doing your survival classes. When you're done with the class for the day, you turn the knife back in, so that way we aren't like wandering around camp with knives. Now, quick note on what kind of knives to bring if you're in Frontier Pathfinders. First of all, we're looking for knives that are more tool-oriented, not knives that are like weaponry-oriented. Now that's a little bit shady because, I mean, when you're dealing with a knife, any knife can be a weapon. But what I'm really talking about is things like daggers or butterfly knives or switchblades or push knives, stuff like that. That's not something we're going to be using out in the woods. You want to use practical woods knives. Some examples of that would be like a pocket knife. Like here we have a little pocket knife. It's actually a Walmart special, something like that. It's not very big, but it's designed to be used as a tool. Another example is one of a fixed blade is something like this. Again, you have a little fixed blade like that. Notice these are not huge knives, okay? We're not pulling out like big buoys or anything crazy like that. These are smaller knives. A good one if you want to know a knife to buy that's in this category. If you look at Mora Knife, they make a bunch of really good sized knives that would be good for that. That's actually our loaner knives and Mora knives. So they're like $10 to $20 depending on the model you get. Those are some good examples of some good knives to bring. Knives that I'd say steering away from that aren't necessarily weapons, but they aren't really useful for what we're doing is stuff like multi-tools, like right here I have a Gerber multi-tool. They have a knife on them, but what we're doing is we're learning how to do notches and whittling, and as these aren't really designed for that, they tend to be uncomfortable to use. So best to stick with kind of the ones I showed you, things that are like a pocket knife that locks, or like a fixed blade, or something like a Swiss Army knife. Those are good options for knives. So let's talk a little bit about disciplinary policies, behavior, and some things like that. But before we get into the disciplinary side of things, I want to make sure that we do talk about this very important topic. So here at camp, we have kids coming from all different backgrounds, and some of those kids are coming from a special needs background. We do everything we can to work with those children and help them be able to flourish at camp. But occasionally, we run into somebody who maybe their background or maybe their behavioral special needs or physical special needs is something that's beyond what we're able to do. And so we want to address that first because sometimes that can cause, especially when we're talking about behavioral issues, that can cause some conflict in the disciplinary things. So let me start out by saying a couple things with that. First and foremost, we're not a special needs camp. We do our best to accommodate special needs kids as much as we can, but we aren't a camp that specializes in that because oftentimes you're going to have specialized staff that have been trained for those behavioral things. You have more staff. There are actually camps that is what they do. And so as a consequence, we can't always guarantee that we can accommodate all those special needs, whether those are physical ones or whether those are behavioral ones. So we want to toss that out beforehand before we get into disciplinary things because that's sometimes where it can crop up. So if you ever have any questions about, hey, is this something that you can work with or is this something you can't, please feel free to reach out to us, either give us a call or an email. We'll answer that the best we can. And if we're a fit, man, we'll make that work. If we're not, then we can maybe point you towards some people that do specialize in those things. Because we want to make sure that your child has a good time, as well as everybody else coming to camp as well, that everybody's in a good fit and we're in a good place. Because working with horses and physical activity can sometimes be a challenge for some of those needs. But let's go ahead and jump into the disciplinary side of things when we're dealing with different things with behavior and camp policies and rules. because we want to make sure that if for some reason we do have to call or we do have to work with you on that you know where we're coming from, what our policies are, and how we respond to different things. So let's start out first with this. Let me talk about a couple of things that are policies. These are rules of either we don't allow this or this is like a kind of one strike, you're out sort of a thing. So that way you're aware of that. So first of all, this is not a one strike thing, but this is one of those we don't allow. So we don't allow relationships of any kind, no dating relationships or anything of that nature. Obviously friendship relationships, we want that, but things like dating relationships, those stay out of camp. So that's something that we tell the kids, that's a no-go, we don't do that. Just kind of keep that out of the summertime and that will solve a lot of issues there. Another thing we don't allow is bullying. Now, there is a definition for bullying. Sometimes we throw that term around every time somebody offends us. We want to make sure, and then we'll have that kind of definition so you understand what we're defining it as. We're using basically the definition of bullying. And that's kind of like when somebody's targeting, when they're regularly doing something, or it's something of a severity that's targeted, something like that. We don't allow that. We will deal with that right away. Some other things as well, we don't allow hazing, so we'll put a definition up there as well so you know what we mean when we say hazing. We don't allow that, or things like practical jokes being played on people. We steer away from all those sorts of things. Now, here are some things that will definitely cause, like, you're going to be getting a call and you're going to be going home if this happens, okay? So first of all, any kind of physical violence towards staff or campers where the child is either the aggressor or a mutual participant. Okay, if a child is being like, if one kid's bullying, hitting another child, and they defend themselves, I'm not going to get that kid in trouble for defending himself. But if they're mutual participants, or if they're the aggressor, then you're going to be in trouble, you're going to be going home. Sexual activity of any kind, that is a no-go. You will be going home. No questions asked then. Possessing drugs, alcohol, tobacco, vapes, or weaponry, things like that, or if you're threatening people and things like that, those are going to be things you go home for as well. And then last two ones, one I'm going to define a little better, but let's start with this one first. Willfully endangering themselves or others. There's sometimes where a child is not paying attention to safety rules and they put themselves or somebody else at serious risk. Obviously, that's going to be a case-by-case basis, but that could be something that gets you sent home very quickly because we don't want you to get hurt. We don't want you to hurt somebody else, whatever the case might be. And then last but not least, I have defiance on there. Now, that one, the reason why I want to kind of define what I mean by that is obviously anytime a child is misbehaving, there might be a feature of defiance. But what I really mean by that is where the child will not pay attention. They will not follow what they're being told, and they're not working with us on that. Unfortunately, that does happen sometimes where a child is confronted about something and in spite of how our best efforts to make sure to work that out, they're saying, nope, I want nothing to do with it. That can lead very quickly to it escalating and having to go home. Not because we're trying to be mean, but because we can't have somebody who's not going to pay attention when we say, don't go behind this horse, and they say, well, I'm going to do it anyway. Well, they're going to get hurt. So we need to make sure that they're working with us on that. All right, so in the case of things that are not of that caliber, where it's not like escalated to go home right away or whatever else, this is where our procedure works in. First and foremost, we want to try to handle things on the counselor level as much as possible. So what that looks like is when a child is misbehaving, we don't want them to be completely unaware that they were out of line with what they were doing. So what we tell our counselors to do is the very first thing is make sure that kid knows, hey, this is not okay, this is something that we're not going to be doing, and this is how we do want you to behave. Kind of giving that warning of, hey, this is the line and we're kind of crossing it. So that is our first thing right there, is make sure they know what's going on, make sure that they know I shouldn't be doing this. So that's the first one. If that continues to happen and the counselor keeps having to correct it and the child is not changing their behavior, then it might escalate to what we call strike one. Now what strike one is, that's when you have to talk to either myself or Tori or our other manager, Angelina, who's not with us. If it escalates to that, then we either go to them or they come to our office and talk to us, depending on the circumstances. We write out an incident report and we talk to them. There's probably going to be some consequences involved of, hey, you got to sit out from this, or you can't do that, or whatever. But we record that down, and then that's strike one. Hopefully that's where it ends, and most of the time that is where it ends because everybody's like, oh, I got in trouble. If it doesn't, though, and it continues to escalate, then we go to what's called strike two. Strike two, they are talking to us again. We're filling out an incident report again, but this time we're calling you up. So you'll get a call from us. We'll say what's going on. We'll give you the background so that way you know what's happening. And then we have you talk to your child, and basically we try to work together to come up, because our goal is to work things out. Our goal is not to punish, our goal is to discipline, which is to change the behavior to what should be. So we'll try to work with you on that one to figure out how can we move forward so this doesn't keep happening. We want them to have a good time at camp, but they need to follow the rules. If that doesn't work, and we wind up with it escalating, or it's just not, things are not changing, then we go to strike 3. And that's when parents are called, and unfortunately at that point in time, that's a go home. If we have to call a second time, they have to go home, because at that point, you know, they're not learning from their mistake, and it's continuing to affect themselves and others. They need to go home at that point. Of course, again, we go ahead and we file a report with that as well. There is no refund for a child going home from camp early because of disciplinary things. So that's one thing to bear in mind. But at that point, they go home. If it's a serious offense, it could affect their ability to come back later as well. So that's something to be aware of. And that's why I really want to encourage people, work with us on that, kids, because we don't want that. We want those kids to have a good time, not have to go through that process. But if that's where we wind up, that could be a potential consequence as well. So those are some things with the disciplinary procedures to be aware of, so you know where we're coming from, and as well as we can work together, because our goal is for everybody to have a good time at camp, but do so safely and follow the rules. One of the biggest things we're known for here at Marvin Valley is our horses. This is the thing that sets us apart from a lot of other camps. In fact, there's almost no camps in the U.S. that does the same level of teaching that we do, which is really cool. But with that, let's give you a few information bits, so that way you come prepared for camp, and then you can go from there. First of all, we follow the CHA curriculum, which is the Certified Horsemanship Association curriculum. That's what we use for our riding program. Unless you're in one of the non-horse specialty camps, which there's only 2 of those, unless you're in one of those, every morning we spend down at the stables learning how to ride and learning at whatever level your child is at. And the riding program looks something like this. You have a barn class where you learn like the facts and information. You have a arena class where you practice skills, and you have a trail ride where we go out and kind of just do things for fun. There's some other things with some of the specialty camps that are equine specialty camps. We'll talk about that in a second. Now, with CHA, the levels that we teach, we actually split it up a little bit, because there's level 1. We actually do level 1A and B. And this is because it's hard to take all of level 1 and turn it into something you can teach in a week. Okay, so we divide it up into levels 1A and 1B. And then we have 2A, 2B, 3A, 3B, and so on. Now, something to be aware of, the beginner levels like 1A and 1B, it's possible with those, not always likely, but it's possible to get that done in a week. But once you get beyond level 1 and start getting into level 2A and 2B, at that point in time, there's more information than what can really be covered in 1 week. So it might take several different times coming to camp before you actually start progressing, unless a person is doing lessons throughout the year. Because even if you did fantastic last year at 2A, if you haven't ridden at all until you get back in the saddle again in the week of camp, it's not very likely. First of all, you're probably going to have to relearn a lot of things. And second of all, it's not very likely that you're going to pack a whole year's worth of lessons into 1 week and still be able to meet those benchmarks. So what they do to judge whether or not you go from one level to another is that there's certain skills benchmarks for each level that the camper has to demonstrate that they're able to do before the end of the week in order to progress. Now, for some people, when they go to camp, they're all about wanting to progress those CHA levels. If that's you, then I would advise, A, go into like some of those used book places like Aid Books or Thrift Books or something like that, and pick up a CHA manual so you can be studying that on the off season. Also, if you want to be able to continue to advance in the program and do it year by year by year, you really ought to think about taking lessons outside of camp. So that way you don't lose all the skills that you learned and then you have to come back and relearn them and then try to advance as well. But here's another thought to consider. A big part of being out here with the horses is enjoying the time with the horses. So one thing I'd really encourage as a parent, and what I encourage my kids with is you know what? You want to learn, you want to progress, but don't make your entire week hinging on whether or not you progress from level 2A to 2B. Enjoy the time you have, enjoy learning, try to pick up some new skills, and just take your time to be in the moment, enjoy being with the horses. don't make your week ride on, ooh, did I pass at the end of the week? Because then if you don't, then it feels much bigger of a deal. And again, as I said before, it can be hard to pass from those upper levels into the next one when you're only doing it for 1 week. So I'd strongly encourage, kind of foster that idea with your kids. So right now in front of us, we've got some tack here, a couple different types of tack. So Tori, you want to tell us what this is we're looking at?
Sure. So this is Western saddle right here, and you have an English right here. You can see a little bit of difference. So if you're a beginner, we suggest that you stick to Western instead of English. And you have the option to choose Western and English while riding during camp.
All right, and so that'll be actually under registration. It'll ask you Western or English, so you're aware. And as Tori said, if you are starting out and you're a beginner, start with Western. Now, a quick note with our English, if you've ridden CHA with us either in a different barn or at our facility, and you've done Western, be aware you can try English if you want. However, you might have to relearn some things. You might not come in at the same level. So if you were like, say you were a level 3 on Western, starting out with English, you might wind up at the level 2 because of the fact that we've got to teach you how to ride English, which is different. I mean, you're still level 3 on Western, but you might only be level 2 on English. So it's something to be aware of with that. You're probably going to have to relearn some things, like how to put this tack on. I mean, you can look at it right away. These are 2 very different saddles. So that's something to be aware of. So let's talk about some of the specific horse specialty camps. So our first one is horsing around. That's for any level rider. And what that does is instead of just doing riding in the morning, you also have blocks set aside in the afternoon to do riding activities, so you get even more opportunities with the horses than what a regular, original horse camp person would. So that's horsing around. So now let's talk about Horsing Around Pro. So Horsing Around Pro is Western only, and it's for level 2 and above. Now, the reason why it's level 2 and above is they're starting to do more advanced activities. So they're doing things on horseback that it's not going to be any level. So it's going to have to be level 2 and above, and that's Western only. Our next one we have is Equine Camp. So Equine Camp is for those who really want to do some advanced English riding. Now, there's a little bit more technical skill involved, so the Equine Camp has to be level 3 and above. So that's something to be aware of as well as you're signing up. Now, just a reminder, you can sign up for English for any week you'd like. But if you want to do advanced English riding, then a specialty camp, Equine is your camp. So that's the one to be aware of there. And then just a couple other things to be aware of with our horses as well. Remember those riding boots. Remember, if you have gear, you can bring it with you, as well as if you have your own helmet, you can bring it with you as well, though we do provide those. All kids are required to use them, so we provide them if you need them, but if you'd like to bring your own helmet, you can do that as well. Just, I would stick your name in that helmet, so that way it doesn't get mixed up with all the others, because it's all the same basic brands. But something to be aware of there. So that's a little bit about our riding program. If you have any questions about that, feel free to send us an email, and we'll be happy to answer. Well, thank you for joining us for this frequently asked questions video.
If you have any more questions, feel free to call or contact us at the office.
All right, well, thank you, and have a great day.